All right. Hi, everyone. It's Vicky Diaz.
Janet Caballero-Daltrey.
Yeah, Janet's joining me for this really special recording. And we're joined by our partner from One Community, Angela Hugley. Hi, Angela.
Hi, I'm absolutely delighted to be spending time with the two of you today.
Thank you. We feel very official. We're using mics, like handheld mics. So I feel very just on reporter mode, even though Pride Month is a great opportunity for us to really have these conversations. It definitely is a year-round opportunity of focus. And I'm sure you can speak very well to that. I think Pride Month is full gears onto making an impact, but I would love to hear more. Can you just give everyone a sort of a brief into what One Community is and its evolvement?
Yeah, sure. And again, thank you for the opportunity. We're a 13-year-old organization. I was saying before we started the podcast that One Community was founded as a media company because my background is in media, and we're storytellers. And I think we're all selling something. And at One Community, we're selling diversity, inclusion, equity, and equality for all Arizonans, right? And really for all Americans too. So we launched as One Community Media in December of 2008, right? Just as the stock market crashes. But the idea really behind One Community was really around consumer activism. And our first tagline was, "You vote with your wallet every day," right? So, use that mechanism that you have in your spend, right, to do business from a business to business standpoint and a business to consumer standpoint with companies and organizations that align with your values. And so the fact that we're 13 years old, I think we're grateful. It's been a remarkable ride, but I think we were really ahead of our time and really disruptive in the space at that time, because I think that when you look at consumers now, they definitely want to do business and buy products and services from companies and organizations that have their same set of values, right? So again, launch as a media company, and we spend a couple of years just really educating the business community about who LGBTQ consumers are and who we are as professionals within your ranks. In 2013, we come up with this really remarkable idea to start a pledge called the Unity Pledge, because we realize that most Arizonans and most Americans mistakenly believe that LGBTQ people, both in the state and in our nation, have the same rights and protections. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, in 2022, in 50% of the state of Arizona, based on population, half of LGBTQ Arizonans or people that travel into the state do not have the same protections in employment, housing, or public accommodations. So we need to do better. We've come a long way. We're at 50%. Yeah. The state needs to be there, but also more than half of our states are in the same position. And so if we really want to be a state that has a sustainable opportunity moving forward, it's incumbent upon us to become a state that truly celebrates and respects and protects us all equally. And I would say the same holds true to our nation as well. So that's a little bit about us. We've evolved into advocacy through the pledge and really through SB 1062, which the Right to Discriminate bill, which was introduced in 2014. And we knew that we could not sit idly by. And so because we'd been educating the business community for so long, businesses of all shapes and sizes came out very voicefully against SB 1062. And that's when we launched our Open for Business to Everyone campaign around the Unity Pledge. 3,500 businesses that have a footprint in the state of Arizona have now taken the Unity Pledge. It is the largest pledge of its kind in the nation. Yeah, so great things about Arizona.
And we just re-signed just moments ago. And one of the great things, prior to even me and Janet being here is, Matt had already had that relationship with you. And so I'm really excited for sort of this new, how kind of I see it with the re-signing of the pledge is like this new resurgence of all the great things that we can do together, and especially within our DEI team that's shaping and forming into something really, really amazing. I'm excited for that. And also, if anyone gets a chance to see the pledge, I'm sure we'll have it. I was asking Angela about it. I'm like, oh, do you have it? Thinking it's probably like a piece of paper. She's like, oh, I have something big for you. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's just, she's hyped up. She's hyping me up. And I come in and I'm like, no, it's really a big sign. Yeah, which is really exciting. I mean, it's almost sort of like living out your little dreams of having like a huge check that you get to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your big unity pledge. Well, what's cool is organizations like yours many times like to frame it or put it in their lobby because they want the folks walking through their doors to know that they value everyone, that these are our core values organizationally and institutionally, that we value everyone. We believe in an LGBTQ inclusive workplace and an LGBTQ inclusive Arizona, right? Like, because again, it's the right thing to do. It's also really good for the business of the state. When we treat everyone fairly, we create a sustainable business model for our state, for everyone, right?
On top of course, you guys not only being very much a part of what's occurring on the political level, but you also you give opportunity for businesses and for those who are also have signed the pledge. Also, I'm sure people who are just curious, but you do workshops and various teachings. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. We host 2 summits that are complimentary every year. It's our Point of Pride Summit, which always happens in June. We just had a really remarkable summit last week, actually. And then in the fall, actually, it'll be after the November election. So probably in early December, we'll have our Unity Summit, which we launched during the pandemic and after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and just said we have a platform and an opportunity to bring people together to have the important conversations that we need to have as a society and as a community. And one community is good at building that stage, right? We're really good at creating that, I think, really trusted interactive space where people know that they're safe to have the important and difficult conversations that we need to have to move forward. And then we also have our One Community Institute. And so that's a paid opportunity, but it's a LGBTQ inclusive DEI certification. There's nothing like it in the nation. And this really comes from our more than decade of working alongside businesses and organizations of all shapes and sizes. And really the work that we do, which is very much about socially responsible business advocacy, right? We took what had been seen as social justice, LGBTQ equality and equity, and we put a business and sustainability lens to it and made it about socially responsible business advocacy. And so I think that, we're really one of the most innovative organizations in our nation in the way that we do this, the way we walk alongside our partners and don't judge and give people, no matter where they're at in their journey, and understanding why we should all be valued and have equal opportunities and the same laws and protections. We just want to give people a safe place to learn where we're at and why doing what is right and treating all people fairly, again, is right. We're healthier as a society. We're healthier as a state, and we're more sustainable too. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are really good reasons to get up in the morning, right?
Yeah, I know. I just was thinking of that. I was like, what a rewarding position and like experience that you get to call work. So there are so many different stories and backgrounds and experiences that people have. And I'm sure also because of that, there's a reflection of so many experiences and issues and, matters that need to be addressed still. Being in this position, how do you, I guess, what goes into making sure that you're hitting all of these realms so that way you can make sure that we're getting equality for that entire community? Because, sometimes I think even too, from an outside perspective, some people think it's just black and white, and they tend to maybe forget about transgender youth, or they may forget about just something that's definitely out of their day to day. And I'm just curious from your side, what does that juggling look like? How do you know what to address first? Is it sort of just putting out the first fire, or?
It's such a great question. The answer is right. And so I think that our team, we are very good listeners, and we hear what's going on around us. And I think we really try not to be reactionary. We really work, I think, in a thoughtful, strategic way to be responsive and to educate our partners. I think that's such a big part of the work that we're doing is you have to educate people. Many folks don't realize that we all have a gender identity, right? We all have a sexual orientation, right? And so I think being in this place where we're constantly educating is really important. We don't make assumptions. We walk alongside our partners, and we try, when issues arise in the state of Arizona this year, we've had 15 anti-LGBTQ pieces that were introduced. 2, unfortunately, made it to the governor's desk and were signed. One was a no medical transition or surgeries for transgender individuals prior to the age of 18, and the other was no trans girls playing sports in K through 12. Really unfortunate and not necessary. Most people don't realize that we have the Arizona Interscholastic Association, that the AIA has a really, really good policy in place for young kids that want to play K through 12 sports based on their gender identity, and that there's a process and there's policies in place, and that these policies are really good and they've worked since 2017. And the difficulty, what's really difficult right now, I think, is the overt politicization of LGBTQ Americans and LGBTQ Arizonans. And in that overt politicization, really the politicization really of young trans kids who are the most vulnerable members of our community, right? And so it's very difficult, and we want to educate people, and we want to do everything we can to stop as many bad pieces that are introduced as we possibly can. And unfortunately, 2 pieces made it to the governor's desk, and he signed them. And these types of bills are unfortunately being signed around the United States right now. And we expect it to be really rocky next year as well, which is why I think it's incumbent upon all of us to work towards a bipartisan federal solution that does not have all the answers, but would protect LGBTQ Americans in employment and housing and public accommodations and jury service and credit, right? I think that when we have equal protections in public spaces and in employment, that's really important. I think the other thing that's really important that most people don't understand is LGBTQ Americans currently have employment protections if they work for a company or organization that has 15 or more employees, and that's based on the U.S. Supreme Court decision, the Bostock decision. And of course, we have marriage equality, and that's based on the Obergefell Supreme Court decision. And I think that's something that should give everyone pause that cares about LGBTQ equality and equity is the Roe leak. The draft leak from the Supreme Court, because what it says is if you don't codify these decisions, then the opportunity to roll back current protections is very present. And I think we're sounding the alarm, rightfully so, that employment protections, federal employment protections for LGBTQ Americans that currently exist because of the Bostock ruling could very well be rolled back. The Obergefell marriage decision is without doubt, I think in some jeopardy. There are 2 Supreme Court justices who have publicly spoken on the record saying that they thought that Obergefell went too far, right? Marriage comes with civil marriage. This is a civil decision, 1,138 rights and protections for married couples. And I know what it's like for my wife and I to have driven around with, big envelopes with all of these legal documents signed prior to being able to legally marry and have those 1,138 rights and protections to protect our family, to ensure that if something happened to one of us, we were in we had the decision-making capabilities that we deserved, right? So I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to get something over the line in a bipartisan fashion, that we have to find ways to work collaboratively and together. And if we don't, then I do think that employment and marriage equality could be at risk, right? And so we cannot take things for granted. And if you are LGBTQ or you know someone and love someone who is LGBTQ, then I encourage you to do 2 things. I mean, in Arizona, you can go to openaz.com and sign the Unity Pledge, but really support our bipartisan coalition in this bipartisan framework for federal protections. That's equalityandfairness.com. This is important. And when you sign the equalityandfairness.com pledge, you get a hyperlink. You can let your elected officials know that you support this, that we need to get this over the line. And that's really important because our elected officials move when they hear from their constituents, right? And so to say that this is not my issue, this is everyone's issue, right? And if you can't find a minute in your day to take a pledge, I mean, I don't have an answer for that. We do everything we can at One Community to make this as easy on people as we possibly can. We know that we're overburdened. We know that we're all trying to put food on the table and take care of our families. We have the highest inflation we've had in 40 years. We've gone from the Great Resignation to people being concerned about layoffs, right? There's a lot of movement in our society and in our world right now. And we're simply asking people to take 1 minute out of their day. So find that minute, prioritize the common humanity that we all share as people and as Americans and as Arizonans, and talk to your friends and your family, right? We can't be too busy to not care for one another. And I think that's one of the things that comes out of COVID too, right? Like we were talking before we started this, like, we're all like socially awkward now, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to live in a bubble and to be, as heroic or as much of a jackass as you want to be on social media, right?
Right.
And there's no accountability and there's no responsibility, right? You can just say whatever you want to say, right? But words matter. They carry great importance, and actions matter. And so be thoughtful in your actions and don't judge people and treat people fairly and be kind and be good. And, remember that when you type something and press send, like that is impacting someone, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we all need to take a step back and we all need to reevaluate. And we need to remember that like what we have in common is our humanity. Like we're all people, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like kind of start there. So, I mean, that's my soapbox for today.
No.
Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there.
No. But no, when you think about it too, it's, there could be some people who, as an ally, are like, I'm not sure where to begin, where to start. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who are just like, not my problem, so I'm just not going to do anything. And and this really is like what you said is a testament to these are basic human rights. Yep. These are the fact that like, as you're describing this experience of like just having, all this paperwork, and it does, as an ally, from outside looking in, I see that there are more hurdles than to go through a simple process, whether it's something like adoption or if it's something as, taking out a loan together. We've made quite, some strides, but like you said, it does get scary when, things start shaking around and you're worried about the things that you already feel like, well, we stabilized that. Like we got that.
My wife and I just bought a house. So we lived in this cute little cottage in a historic district for over 2 decades. And when we purchased that, babies, number one, children, so young. But like we had to purchase the house joint tenant right of survivorship because legal marriage and those protections that come with a civil marriage were not available to us. This is really interesting to 3 or 4 weeks ago, sign this paperwork and we sign as a married couple, right? And so if you're not LGBTQ and you have the experience of purchasing a home with your spouse, right? Like they're just not your lived experiences. So you don't understand that those hurdles are there and have been there historically. And we don't want hurdles for anyone, right? Like a thriving society is when we really create opportunity for everyone, right? And so we want to get rid of perceived hurdles and real barriers to happiness and thriving, right? When we look at LGBTQ youth, they have a much higher percentage of experiencing homelessness, of attempted suicide. If we're looking at young trans youth, that number goes up exponentially. If you are a child in this world, we want to make sure that you are given the opportunity at happiness and to thrive and to be your best self. And so we, as a society, have a responsibility to educate one another. And it's okay that we don't have it all figured out, right? And to not make assumptions and to not just, we just can't just sit there and just profile one another and just be like, well, they automatically believe this because they are a part of this group, right? If what we're doing is we're taking opportunities away from ourselves. And at the end, we all lose, right? So all of this is everyone's issue. And I do think, to your point, it can be so overwhelming on where to start that people freeze. And so the thing that I always think about and that our team always thinks about is, how do we make this easy? How do we express what this means if this piece of legislation passes or doesn't pass in a way that is common sense, that makes sense to folks who don't spend their, I mean, I always say that like I'm light on policy. Like we did not start from we're not a traditional advocacy organization. I helped craft this bill, this Equality and Fairness for All Americans, or All Arizonans bill that we introduced in a bipartisan, or was introduced in a bipartisan fashion, in the first quarter of this year. Like, I think I could pass the LSAT now, right? But that's my experience, right? Of like, well, we want to make sure that we have these protections, and these are the things to think about. That is not most people's experience, right? And so we as a society should just not make assumptions. We need to just meet people where they're at and ask them how they feel about things, and give people the opportunity to engage in whatever it is that matters to them in a way that is not so overwhelming that people tip.
And that also feels like
it feels good
for anything, but it also, for what you just said, we just need to like be open and listen. And sometimes that can be the hardest piece, really, from my experience with, certain items, it's, it could be anyone, but, an older generation, it's hard for them to switch to something different. And because that's how they're seeing it. I need to just switch this, but really it's like, no, take a minute, like really reflect. And I think also a lot of that comes from them just not listening or taking the time to have that conversation.
I think it's more than that too, right? Like we have to understand that we're a product of our lived experiences, right? And so if you grew up, and maybe you've been around the sun a couple more times than you and I, right? And you haven't known someone who was gay or transgender, then based on your lived experiences, you have questions about a person's sexual orientation. You don't understand that we all have gender identity, right? A gender identity. That like there are because you're just, again, a product of your lived experiences. And so if you've not met people that are different than you, right? Then a different culture, or a person that has a different sexual orientation or different gender identity, right? Then it makes sense that you don't know how to relate. And so I think if we can just start with like, what do we have in common? Yeah. And that is, this is who I am, right? And this is how I can be my best self. Okay. And you're my grandchild and I want you to be happy. Right. Maybe I don't understand transitioning, but I know that you're my grandchild and I know that I love you and I know that I want you to be happy and successful. Then we'll start there, right? Start in a place that, that we can agree on, and then, go from there. Sherry and I have been together 28 years. We, many moons ago, went through a bit of a difficult time, and I went back to our family farm in the Midwest, and, my grandmother was like, what's going on? Like, oh, I'm getting it. I'm like, I don't know. We're just having a hard time. She's like, but you're still married, right? And I was like, well, yeah. And she's like, and you're married, right? And I'm like, yes, grandmother, we're married. She's like, well, get your shit together and figure it out, right? Because you two took vows and they matter. And so, we took my grandmother's advice and we got through it, right? So like, that's just it. None of us are perfect. We all have stuff. We all have stuff. We all have difficult times. We all make mistakes. We're human beings. None of us is perfect. So if we can come into whatever conversation we're having with whoever this person is, this hypothetical person is, and if we don't make assumptions based on their age or based on where they're from or based on their socioeconomic background or culture or any of the other things that we identify people with, and just meet people where they're at and just be like, so let's have this conversation and see where it goes. I can tell you, I think to me that in so many ways is the embodiment of this beautiful relationship that we have with the LDS Church. And we met in a very vulnerable time. Our LGBTQ community is very vulnerable. Mesa was very vulnerable. Arizona was very vulnerable. People did not want this ordinance to pass. There's great responsibility that comes with our team because people rely on us, and we never want to let someone down. We also know that we don't please everyone because we're very, very, very centered in the work that we do. And people and organizations would wish that we tilt more to the left. And my point is, if you believe in diversity, inclusion, and fairness for all, then we want to have a conversation with you. We won't tilt and we won't discard anyone, and we'll have a cup of coffee with anyone. Or if you don't drink coffee, we'll have a non-caffeinated beverage with anyone. And because that has really been our belief, we've had some of the most remarkable experiences, and we've, I think, made people better, and those people have made us better. Right. And when we can share our experiences as Arizonans and as people and as Americans, then we have an opportunity to really like thrive.
In a personal level, because for me, I identify as bisexual. I'm married to a woman. So I wanted to hear maybe about your experiences, any sort of maybe like struggles or roadblocks that you may have hit. And like, I'm like, all of those are learning experiences, but sort of, I guess, stories. Or...
Sure. Coming out professionally was always a very, thoughtful conversation between Sherry and I, because the reality is we live in a state where it's not unlawful to fire people. And we've come a really long way. I do want to say that we've come a very, very long way in this great state. I just was in this place where I was just like, I don't think we're doing anything wrong. I'm not embarrassed by who we are. And professionally, if someone asks me a direct question, I'm going to answer directly. So, I get the opportunity to go to work for Clear Channel Radio, which is now iHeartRadio. Yeah. And KISS FM, and get hired. And I'm very excited, the top 40 station, super excited. But like I walked through the door and again, like full of nerves. This is a really great professional opportunity. And my two managers, they take the new kid out to lunch then the day that they start. And so I didn't make it to the restaurant, but I'm in the back of the car. One of my managers is driving, and like one of them says, "So like, are you married?" And my response was, "Well, not legally."
Yeah.
And then I know I was sassy back then, wasn't I? Still a little sassy.
Yeah.
And then I think the next question was, "Do you have any children?" And I said, "Nope. We keep trying. It's just not working for some reason." And there was kind of like an oh. So like, and like, by this time, like we're sitting down and like that first glass of water is being poured. I'm like, well, we'll see how this goes. But I like really walked into Clear Channel and I was like, we have to go Hispanic and we have to go gay. We need to do this. And that was a courageous, and some would say very foolish decision at that time. And I did really well. I really enjoyed working in radio. And I had a mentor. She called me Muffin. I'm in the radio station and I'm like just pacing. And my mentor says, "Muffin, get on the air." And I'm like, they're going to fire me. She's like, "You need to get it down there and you need to go tell your story. Get down there." And I'm like, oh my God, it was like the longest walk of my life. And I walked down this very long, that corridor was like 5 times longer than it had ever been before. I go down into the, and I open the soundproof, that pushed that big door, and I came in and put on a headset. And Sherry and I had been together for 12 years at that time. And I proceed to tell her story. And I'm like, my wife, my partner, because we weren't allowed to get married, I'm like, has had like 5 brain operations. Like we drive around with like an envelope hoping that like we can make medical decisions for one another. Yeah. That's what this is about. And just like, I don't know, talked extensively about it for 45 minutes or an hour, and walked back and was like, oh, I hope I still have a job kind of thing, And like kid came over to me and he was like, "Thank you. Like my little brother's gay. And like, you just like, thank you. Like that helped." Right. And it was super teary and whatever. And to make a long story short, I had a fantastic, I loved my time at Clear Channel. It was great. And we did people were like, "Well, how can you do radio copy where like you can tell that it's a same-sex couple?" Right. And I was just like, well, it's easy. Like our voices can be 2, person 1 and person 2 can both be female, or person 1 and person 2 can both be male. And it was so cool. We did it. And, to make a long story short, or just you see how circular things are, and like you're just doing something because you believe it's the right thing to do. A couple of years ago, we started having this conversation with, iHeartMedia, and they're partners, and they gave me a show called Off the Record with Angela Hughey, because people have always told me things off the record. And like, what a remarkable, on their Pride radio network, right?
Yeah.
So here you are, you know, I don't know, 12, 15 years later. And, you know, we have like this 15-minute weekly show where we talk to business leaders and community leaders and elected officials about like why it's so important that Arizona is inclusive. And iHeart gave me that opportunity.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Right? The rising tide lifts all boats. Teaching the business community who we are. That's the impetus of creating this. And then I think just always finding there is opportunity in adversity. And we were created in an adverse situation we didn't know we were going to be. So Sherry and I like hop over to California and San Diego, get married at the Hard Rock Cafe, dump our entire 401k into one community. What were we thinking? The fact that this woman stands beside me, she's so remarkable. Like, yes, we're going to do this. Like, I am deeply grateful for the courage that my person, my partner, my best friend, my wife, my like this amazing human being, Sherry Owens, like brings to us. Because I think we were probably kind of crazy in coming up with this idea.
Well, I want to speak on personal experiences because I want to hear, you know, Janet and I have been working together for a couple months, but, you know, on a personal level, you know, we don't know each other that well. And so in this setting, I'm really curious, you know, because we've heard your experience of what that was like. And even 12 years into your relationship, what that was like. Janet, what has it been like for you? You know, did you feel growing up in your dynamics? I know you're also of Hispanic heritage, like as well as myself. Was that easy to have that in definitely in a culture that's very much ingrained in black and white sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, so I actually, like, I grew up in Puerto Rico, and I went to Catholic school from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. So it was a very, like, unique experience. I would say at the time, I was kind of just not thinking about it. I, like, looking back on it now, I can see all the ways that my school was, like, not so subtly pushing people to like not like, especially having gone to an all-girls school, like for just through high school, but still, like, I could see all the ways that the school was kind of like, both don't have sex with boys because that's against, like, you have to get married first, and also, but we're not going to talk about what if you don't like boys, like what if you like girl, like it was very like, just, we're not going to talk about it, where it gay people, I mean, I did go to kind of like a somewhat less conservative school. So like we had our religion class and we had some teachers who were like nicer and who were like, it's okay if people are different, and that's not like, no one here is, but but it's okay if other people are, you know? So I kind of had that upbringing that was kind of like, you know, you should treat everybody nicely, but just don't worry about that stuff, essentially. So in terms of coming out, I technically like didn't come out to my mom until I was dating my now wife, because we had been dating for maybe like a year or two, and like she really wanted to see where I was from, and like I hadn't been home in a couple of years, and my parents, like, obviously they wanted me to come visit because, oh, it's been so long and we miss you and it's great. And so like I planned this trip with my girlfriend, and I was kind of like, well, I have to tell them that you're my, like, I'm not going to go through the awkward experience of having to go visit my parents and pretend this is my best friend and roommate. Like, so like before we, I mean, we booked the trip because my parents were like super excited and they really wanted us to go and everything. And before we did this, like I had to tell my mom, I was like, you know, like, Ashley's my girlfriend and we're living together and we're going to visit, but this is the reason she's coming with me isn't just like, oh, here's my cool friend who wants to see Puerto Rico. Like, and so, I mean, it was a little hard. It was really awkward because my mom is very religious. But like, she's very like well-meaning. So she was very like, oh, okay. Like, she didn't really understand, but she's the kind of person who will like send me emails about the Pope said that it's okay to love your gay children. Look, and all that stuff. And I'm like, great.
We're making progress. Thank you, Pope Francis.
Yeah. So she'll send me things like that. And like my dad was really awkward about it just because he's very, very old fashioned. So like, it was really nice being there because I like hung out with my mom, and like we went out like bowling with my aunt, and she was really nice, and like my family has been really supportive. It's kind of funny because like my aunt and I think like my aunts and stuff, they were a little more like progressive and cool. So like when I went out with my aunt or like one of my like grandmothers, she was like, oh, that's so great. Like, I'm so happy for you and everything. And so that was really nice, but it's definitely like, it's gotten less awkward with time, I would say. Like my parents are actually coming to visit in September, and it was very like, oh, you should just come over and stay over. And we have a guest room and you can stay there. And so they're finally like, oh yeah, like that'd be really nice. I feel like a couple years ago, even maybe before we got married, they would have been like, oh, I don't know, maybe we'll stay at a hotel. And, you know, like that's just what it is. But my wife and I got married in 2019 in December, which was really convenient because it was right before the pandemic. So I got to get the really nice wedding. And then the next month, everything started shutting down. And my parents were both at that. And like my family, a couple of my aunts and uncles came to visit and everything. And that was really nice. The wedding experience was also very interesting because we had to look for flowers and we had to look for bakeries, and thankfully like this is kind of a funny thing. So because my wife has celiac disease, we could only get gluten-free cakes and food and everything, but gluten-free people tend to also be very like open-minded, so we didn't have any issues with the cake and finding somewhere that would be willing to do like a gay wedding cake. But when it came to like flowers, we definitely like, I would call and make an appointment and say like, hey, I want to see like whatever, and we'd go and we'd have like the consultation. And there were like one or two places, this was in Tucson actually, there were one or two places where I could tell that this lady that I was talking to was not expecting me to be making this call for two brides, as opposed to, I'm just the best friend calling for my bride's like whatever, you know. So I could tell. And in fact, we didn't get like the place that we ended up going to was the only place that called us back.
Wow.
Because all of the other places, like even though they gave us the spiel and they gave us the paperwork and everything, they like never followed up, because I mean like I knew that it was, oh, they just don't want to give us flowers because we're in a gay wedding, you know. So there's definitely been like some struggles and some things like that you don't think about. But we're really lucky that they've passed all this legislation and that they've made it a lot easier and everything, because even things like we changed our names legally. My wife and I, we hyphenated our last names. So we both have the same last name and it's hyphenated and everything. And that was a really, really like surprisingly simple process. And now that like we have our like marriage license and we just go places and it's like, here's a marriage license, you can change our names. And they're like, oh, okay. Did you have your birth certificate? Yeah, here we go. And so it's much easier now, and I'm like super grateful. And I know like my wife is a lawyer, so we're very up to date on all of the legal things, and we know about like how brush and nib came out, and that's why they did all that stuff and everything. And so like it's been really interesting and it's been really great. And I know that we're so lucky, and that even what we have now is very, very like tenuous, you know, like this all these rights that we are able to get now are like, they really are at risk, because even just the federal, like the Supreme Court, the Obergefell doesn't actually list out any rights. It just says, yeah, you should have those kind of. And so it's been a really interesting and unique experience to have for sure. But I mean, things really are like getting a lot better. And even like with my parents, like every year it gets less awkward for them, and they get more supportive, and they're like, oh, how's Ashley doing and all that stuff. So it's been really great. Like, and I hope that we can keep things going and keep things getting better and everything.
Yeah. And I think that coming out is a journey, and coming out as an ally is a journey, right? And like that patience with your parents is awesome. And I'm glad they're staying over. That's cool, right?
Yeah.
Because they get to know you and your wife and just like your awesome dynamic together, and see you and, you know, have coffee with you in the morning and make those like really precious memories. And so much of this is, I think, is just, you know, getting to know one another. And
I'm really excited for us to further this partnership. And I just want to thank you so much for coming and joining us, and really giving us this wonderful and insightful look into One Community, but also to who you are.
Yeah.
Because that's the essence of like we've been talking about, is just individuals finding common ground and hearing each other out. So thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate it.
So
And I'm very excited for what's going to come next with One Community and Ideas Collide.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So are we. Like, how much fun are we going to have moving forward? I'm excited. We'll have to do like a year recap, and we can talk about all the fun things we've done. So I'll see you back here next June.
Yeah. We'll bring the beers.
We'll bring the beer. Four Peaks makes us a beer that's called "We're Here, We're Beer, Get Used to It." It's got glitter in it. It's pretty darn good too.
That's great.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.